Every day, millions of eggs get cracked open in kitchens all across the US, especially in the morning when breakfast is being made without much thought. And just like that, the shells usually end up in the trash. No hesitation, no second guess. It's just something people have always done. But every now and then, you stop and wonder, is that really all there is to it? Because that thin, fragile shell doesn't look like much, but it shows up in your hands every single day. It's been there your whole life, quietly part of your routine, yet almost never considered beyond waste. And that's where things start to get interesting. When you actually take a closer look, you realize this trash might not be as useless as it feels. It connects in small ways to things you care about more than you think: your health, your home, even simple ways of saving a bit of money without changing your lifestyle. It almost sounds like an exaggeration at first. Most people would probably brush it off and move on. But once that idea settles in, it gets harder to ignore. Because maybe those eggshells were never just empty pieces after all. Most people never really think about what an eggshell actually is. It just feels like waste the moment you crack an egg and move on with your breakfast. But in reality, that thin shell is almost entirely calcium carbonate, the same basic material you'll find in many calcium supplements sitting on pharmacy shelves. And what's surprising is how much calcium is packed into something so light and fragile. A single shell can actually hold a meaningful amount, enough to make you pause for a second and rethink what you've been tossing away for years without question. When it's properly cleaned, dried, and ground into a fine powder, it can even be used in very small amounts as a natural calcium source. Nothing complicated, nothing fancy, just a simple way of turning something ordinary into something useful again. But here's where it gets more interesting. Because once you understand what it's made of, you start noticing it doesn't just connect to health. It quietly links into other parts of daily life too, in ways most people would never expect at first glance. There's a strange little trick some coffee drinkers still talk about, even today. They'll drop a small piece of eggshell right into the coffee grounds before brewing. At first, it sounds almost wrong, like something that shouldn't belong anywhere near your morning cup. But the idea behind it is actually simple. The eggshell can help tone down the acidity a bit, which makes the coffee feel smoother and less sharp on the tongue. Not sweeter, not weaker, just a little more balanced. It's one of those kitchen habits that gets passed around quietly, usually from older generations, or people who've tried everything to fix a bitter cup. And whether it's something you'd ever try or not, it makes you pause for a second. Because once you hear about it, you start realizing this isn't just a coffee thing. It's part of a much bigger pattern with eggshells, and what they can do next is something most people never expect at all. If you've ever grown tomatoes or peppers, you might have noticed something frustrating: those dark, sunken spots that show up on the bottom of the fruit. A lot of gardeners recognize it right away as a sign that something's off with calcium in the soil, and that's where eggshells quietly come back into the picture. When you crush them and mix them into the soil, they don't do anything dramatic at first. No instant change, no overnight fix. Instead, they break down slowly over time, releasing calcium little by little for the plants to absorb as they grow. It's more like a background support system than a quick solution. You almost forget it's even there, until you start seeing healthier plants and more stable growth over time. And at that point, it makes you wonder why something this simple isn't talked about more often. But interestingly, helping plants is only part of the story, because in the garden, eggshells have another role that surprises a lot of people once they notice. One of the simplest things gardeners do with eggshells has nothing to do with nutrition at all. They'll crush them up and scatter the pieces around the base of plants, almost like drawing a rough circle of protection. At first glance, it doesn't look like much, just bits of broken shell sitting on the soil. But the texture is what matters. It's sharp and uneven, and that's exactly what soft-bodied pests like slugs and snails tend to avoid crawling over. What's nice is that it doesn't involve any chemicals or sprays. Nothing that changes the soil in a harmful way. It just sits there and quietly does its job in the background, almost like a passive barrier. It's one of those tricks that sounds too simple to take seriously, until you realize people keep using it season after season. And once you start noticing this side of eggshells, you begin to see they're not just for plants either. They show up in places you wouldn't expect next. Inside every eggshell, There's a thin inner membrane that most people never even notice. It's that almost invisible layer you usually peel off without thinking twice, or throw away along with everything else. But what's interesting is what's actually inside it. That membrane contains compounds that are often found in joint support products, things linked to collagen and other nutrients people usually pay good money for. Some research even suggests it may play a role in easing stiffness or discomfort when it's properly processed. It's not something you'd expect at all from kitchen waste. And honestly, it's the kind of detail that makes you slow down for a moment and rethink the whole thing. Because suddenly, what felt like a simple leftover starts to look like it had more going on beneath the surface. And once that idea sinks in, it naturally leads you to wonder what else people have been overlooking in everyday things around the house. Crushed eggshells can actually be used as a simple cleaning tool, even though most people would never think of them that way. When you break them down and mix them into a basic homemade paste, they start to act like a gentle scrubber for tough messes. You'll see it work on things like stained pots, greasy pans, or even those narrow containers that are always hard to clean properly. The texture does most of the work, lifting off buildup without needing anything harsh or chemical heavy. It feels almost old-fashioned, like something people used before all the modern cleaning products existed, but at the same time, it still holds up surprisingly well when you try it in real life. And what's interesting is how this same material keeps shifting roles. From cleaning your kitchen, it somehow leads you right back into something more connected to living things again, and that next part is where it gets even more unexpected. Farmers and people who raise animals have been reusing eggshells for a long time, mostly in ways most of us never think about. When they're prepared properly, crushed shells can become a simple calcium source for chickens, and in some cases, even added to homemade diets for pets like dogs or cats. It's not complicated, just practical. Something that used to be thrown away suddenly goes back into the system it originally came from. A small loop closes in a way that feels surprisingly natural when you think about it. There's something interesting about that idea, waste turning back into use instead of disappearing into the trash. And what's even more surprising is that this cycle doesn't stop with animals. It keeps going, and the next uses take it into directions most people would never expect from something as ordinary as an eggshell. Eggshells can end up doing a lot more than most people expect once you start paying attention. Some gardeners even use them as tiny seed starters, filling the half shells with soil so young plants can grow in a natural container before being transferred straight into the ground. It's simple, but it works in a way that feels almost satisfying to watch. And that's just one example. The same material can help with cleaning stains in mugs, support compost as it breaks down, or quietly contribute to small household tasks you wouldn't normally think twice about. At this point, something starts to become clear. It's not really about one clever trick or a single use. It's more about how many small systems in your home already exist, and how something you usually ignore can quietly fit into all of them. And still, even after all these uses, there's one final takeaway that brings everything together in a way most people don't expect at first. Even if you never use eggshells for anything specific, just not throwing them away already changes the way you think a little. Some people put them into compost, some mix them into soil, and others just keep them around as part of small habits that slowly reduce waste without much effort. And maybe that's really the point here. It's not about turning everything into some clever hack. It's more about noticing how often we label something as trash just because it doesn't seem useful in the moment. We do that a lot in daily life. Something feels ordinary, so it gets ignored. Something feels disposable, so it gets tossed without a second thought. But usefulness isn't always obvious at first glance. It often comes down to timing, perspective, or simply knowing one more way to see it. Have you ever thrown something away, only to realize later it actually had another purpose? It's a small thing, but it kind of sticks with you the next time you're standing over the trash bin, doesn't it?